Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com for all things Outlander, from the Dinah Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and anything interesting that falls between. This is podcast episode 175 and installment 11 of the Fiery Cross read-along. Hello out there! I am finally back. Yes. If you didn't listen to my little mini message the other day, I unexpectedly and inadvertently and unavoidably ended up on a hiatus. My first one since the beginning of season 2. I became very sick and it lasted a long time, and I did not have an appropriate voice for recording or the time in between coughing. And then I had some personal and professional things come up that really blocked my path for the next weeks. So I'm back. We're here. And I tried my best to get multiple chapters done, but we're doing 19 and 20. And I'm going to record another episode this week so we can get ourselves caught up. The timing of the episodes is going to be a little more random. I'm going to try and get 2 in a week for the next several weeks, and then we will be where we are supposed to be. But keep an eye out. So the whole Fraser clan, everybody is back at Fraser's Ridge. Remember, Jamie has been made a colonel of the militia by Tryon. That was the payment for him getting that acreage of land. That's going to come due. It's going to come due soon. But we really got to see an insight just into the life on the ridge in the beginning of chapter 19, The Devil You Can. And there's several new families there, and they're really building a community. Even though they're so far back in the mountains, they're building something of their own, and it's substantial and it's growing. And the summary goes something like this. The activities of the ridge create a picture of the day-to-day. A friend visits bearing news. Brianna and Roger go a-hunting. The dangers of the 18th century run through Brianna's mind. Only one has experience with a gun. A willing student Roger makes, but a great shot he is not. Memories of a dear one surface. Roger makes a confession. They play a game only travelers can play. Lactating breasts need relief. A foul encounter happens on the way home. Brianna was prepared for the 18th purposely. The setting is late fall on the settlement of Fraser's Ridge, North Carolina. Okay, so now that the gathering is well behind us, we have a new cat. We're adding to the menagerie of animals. And we get to meet one more today. The active characters that we have are Jamie, Claire, Hermon Husband, Brianna, and Roger. So it's a very short list of people that we have to pay attention to in this 2 chapters. So what were the main events that happened? So the main thing that happened in chapter 19, The Devil You Can, is Hermon Husband visits the ridge seeking to sell a horse and carrying a letter. He's being heavily fined by the government and must sell whatever he can to pay or in order to leave with his family. The letter he brings is in service of the Regulators to meet friends versus foes. Jamie and he discuss friendship and duty. We're going to get into this discussion a little bit deeper. It's this whole chapter, and it's really the 2 of them breaking bread and talking about what is going on. Now, we know that Jamie is definitely a sympathizer of the Regulators. Now, the Regulators were not supposed to be at all violent. They were simply supposed to be an assemblage of people who wanted their concerns heard. They wanted their complaints heard. They believed there was corruption and taxation was too high, etc., right? And they're planning on peaceably assembling in a large group. And this is where that letter comes in. But first, when we look at how Hermon Husband arrives at the ridge that day, it's really fascinating because they're in the middle of nowhere. Like, there is no place on the way to or from Fraser's Ridge. You have to purposely want to go there. So he comes on his horse and he asks if Jamie wants to buy his horse. Jamie's like, I don't have any cash. I have like 2 shillings to rub together. And then Herman goes on to explain that he's being heavily fined, and if he doesn't make the payments, his land will be seized and he's going to have to leave the colony and find a new place for his family. So either way, he has to raise funds, and he's been selling stuff as he's been traveling for 10 days. He's trying to raise funds to either pay the government off or for his family to be able to flee. So during this discussion, he pulls this letter out of his bag. Now, the letter has the governor's seal on it. And Jamie reads it, breaks the seal and reads it. And what's so interesting about this is the fact that Hermon Husband did not have to give Jamie this letter. He could have kept it to himself because in the letter, Governor Tryon is calling upon Jamie to go to a certain place, Salisbury, where the Regulators are supposed to be assembling en masse on a specific day. And he wants the militia there to quash it because the governor says that it's an illegal assemblage of people. There's a reason the right to assemble is in our Constitution in the United States. It's because people need to be able to non-confrontationally, in a group, air their grievances to local, state, or federal government. Like, they need to be able to protest. They need to be able to march. They need to be able to be heard. Okay? And prior to that, and this becoming the United States of America, that wasn't allowed. You weren't allowed to speak against the government or the king or numerous other things. And so it put them into a really bad position. And the government took the tack that by any means necessary, you quash them. Now, the governor didn't want loss of life, but he definitely wanted the disharmony to be put down. He wanted those voices of discontent to be quieted. Okay? So as they're in this conversation, Jamie is trying to figure out, like, why did Herman give him this letter? And what it comes down to is, better friends meet on opposite sides, people who are a known entity, than to have people, militia coming from another place that don't know the Regulators. These aren't their friends. These aren't their neighbors, right? They would be much harsher and much more likely to have a poorer outcome for the Regulators than if Jamie's militia, they're friends. They respect each other. And I love the beauty of the relationship building in here. Claire is just on the periphery, during this conversation. And Jamie and Herman are just meeting man to man, friend to friend, and they're meeting out of necessity and also duty. And that was one of the things that came up, I fear in today's day and age that two friends on opposite sides of a situation, of an event, of, you say you have one friend who's very pro-life and one friend who's very pro-choice, or name any other hot topic. Homeschool versus public education, vaccine versus non-vaccine, somebody who is very pro-government and government control versus somebody who's errs on the libertarian side and thinks that the government should not be involved in most things and we should have really minimal regulation and laws. And the government's job is very specific. So can you imagine people who are opposing each other in a situation, and this was a very serious situation, could sit down, have a meal, and just talk about it and say, in the line of duty, I will have to do what I have to do. And then the other saying, I understand what your job is, what you're supposed to do, and what your duty is, regardless of how you feel about this. So they're able to really separate their personal feelings. They're not looking at each other and be like, you hate me because you took Trion's money and now you could help quash the regulators. Like Hermon Husband wasn't whining and complaining. He understands. And he's trying to make it the best possible scenario because he wants to face friends. It's likely to be less devastating, even if they have to do something about the assemblage of people, right? I have a hard time seeing that people can actually sit across from each other as competition and actually have those conversations and still be friends. It's amazing how divisive every topic is now. Like, it seems like there's no middle ground. There's no understanding why people have to do certain things, regardless of how they feel or what they would like to do. That there's a sense of duty and honor and following through with an agreement and doing the job that you've said you do, even though now you know all these people and they're your friends and you understand why they're doing what they're doing. I have a hard time thinking that people who are totally at crossroads in our today's culture could have this kind of meaningful and beautiful and honest conversation that they're having. I mean, at the end of the conversation, Jamie tells Herman to bring his family to the ridge because they'll be safe during the confrontation. So Jamie is really brilliant at skirting the gray. He's brilliant at staying in the lane he's supposed to be in and understanding the different layers. He's an awesome politico. Like, he gets it. He knows how to do that, even though it's not really what he thinks he wants to do. He's brilliant at it. And he's brilliant at creating relationship and trust, upholding what he needs to uphold, and yet extending grace and mercy and safety when they will be opposing each other at Salisbury. I love that. I mean, how Diana crafts this and shows us what friendship is. We don't always have to agree. We don't always have to be on the same side. Everything is not an indictment against you because somebody doesn't agree with what you are, what you're doing. It's not hate. Sometimes it simply comes down to duty and doing what you have to do for your family, even if it means you're not going to be on the same side as people that you care about sometimes. And Jamie is amazing at doing this. Claire isn't so great. I mean, she gets better as the more she's around Jamie. And we saw that at the gathering where she sat down and centered herself and was like, I'm here to heal what's in front of me. I'm here to help what I see and what I can do. I can't fix everything for everybody. Like, that tenacity of hers doesn't go away. But now that she's more mature, she really is keen to understand. She can't fix everything. She can't fix what ails the century that she's in. I mean, the last book, when she was so struck by the horrors of slavery, and I can't own slaves, and Jamie's like, well, me either, I've been a slave. But she was so much, even in how she handled that, it was very different in the show. It was much more Claire being a bull in a china shop and slavery is bad, and she was there for 5 minutes and not integrated into the community, and Jocasta had a right to be really mad at her, right? But in the books, they were there for weeks, and it was much subtler. Like, she had to go and see if she could treat this slave, but when she realized every road led to this man's death, what she could do is give him a more dignified death. He wouldn't be brutalized and torn apart. He wouldn't be made a spectacle. So regardless of right or wrong, of what happened, she focused on the important part of it. She wasn't trying to grandstand about the ills of slavery. We got to see it in Diana's writing. We had to see so much of that and what they went through in the West Indies, right? And we got to see her rashness when they ended up with, Temeraire, the one-armed slave. And then we got to see her grow into who she was at Jocasta's plantation in the next book, where she just sat there and went, okay, this is the reality. And she can't change it just by being brash. So she gave the man a dignified death. I love seeing that growth of Claire. I hope we see that in the TV show. Because by this point in the books, Claire is so much more savvy. She's so less brash. She's so much more sensitive to what's going on around her in the current time. And she's kind of finding her groove on how to do the things that she is compelled to do. But she's not like just creating havoc everywhere she goes like she did in the earlier books, right? With her 20th century morals and social attitudes. And so I'm going to heal or treat what's right in front of me. And maybe just for today, this is enough. But she can't fix it all. And she's stopped trying to be a savior. I love that. And I think Jamie's really kind of, that's wearing off of him onto her, because she sees him manage these situations. Because for the time, he's very progressive. His wife is the substantial person. She does all these amazing things, and a lot of men wouldn't handle that. She's as strong as he is. She's, as tough as he is. She's got that moral center as much as he does. And they're a really good balance for each other. And they help each other grow in ways that they are just desperately lacking when they're apart. And so now we're kind of seeing that cohesion, right? And to see Jamie do this with Hermon Husband, to me, it's brilliant. I hope that I can be not only that savvy and thoughtful, but that I could be that generous of spirit, that I could really look at the whole picture and see all the pieces and say, this is what I can do for you, my friend, even though I'm obligated in opposition of you, and not be personally affronted by it. I would love to see this kind of discourse, but unfortunately, social media is not the place for this kind of discourse. It is not the place for true community where you can see into people and let them see into you and have that vulnerability and that intimacy of relationship. Now, I've built some fantastic, true friendships, relationships through social media over the years. But for the thousands and thousands of people I've come across, it's like 2 hands full. And these are people whose phone numbers are in my phone, and I know them. I've met up with many of them. And they're trustworthy people. I mean, heck, one of them a couple of them actually became some of my dearest friends. It's a shout out to Gina and Colleen. And a very long-time friend of mine I met through social media, who happens to be a birth advocate, and she's a pretty holistic OBGYN. My friend Poppy. We've been friends for, 10 years now. We met on Twitter. And it's a deep, functional relationship, even though we live in different states. And it can happen, but we can't create in a sweeping way those relationships. They require nurturing, in-person contact, trust, and you have to grow with each other through time and share that vulnerability. And a lot of social media is smoke and mirrors and people ranting and raving. And there's this belief now that if you don't think exactly like I do, then you hate me. I don't know where that crap came from. I don't know. But this conversation would look very different in 2019. I envision like Hermon Husband having to, telling Jamie he's bad, and if you show up and you don't declare yourself anti-government, then we can't be friends anymore. And now it's a blood feud, or that kind of thing. I'm going to eviscerate you. I'm going to kill your reputation. You're not going to be trusted anymore. Like, I see it going way different. And definitely Jamie would not be inviting Herman Husband's family to the ridge for safety. So anyway, I just love how this is crafted. And so we kind of get a slower build of the Regulators in the books. Like, they grabbed that stuff out of this book and threw it in to last season of Outlander, and it's unfolding in a very different way. So instead of having Herman Husband, we have Murtaugh. I know I'm breaking my rule about talking about the show, but for those of us, or those of you who haven't read this before, it's going to be very surprising as you come across how some of the details are so different. When you go back and watch the show, you're going to be like, okay. Now, I don't mind that they started the Regulator stuff, but I think it was just too heavy-handed. Like, it's woven into the story in the books in a way that you have time that separates it, and there's a build up to what's happening, and it becomes a central plot point. But that's also, there's some foreshadowing and some other things happening. But there's just isn't time in the show to build those relationships. So they had to build on a standing relationship, and with a character who had spent lots of years apart from Jamie. So there you have it. And that's pretty much the crux of this chapter. And that's really what the whole of it is about. Except for the fact that the menagerie gets another animal, and her name, Herman's horse, is Jerusha. But what she's called is Mistress Piggy because she likes to eat. So they have another hungry caterpillar on the premises. And basically Herman's just leaving his horse, and if his family needs it, they'll come back and get it. I mean, they don't have like a big old truck and a trailer to get that horse. Someone's got to like walk up there, walk how many miles, how many days. It took Herman, was making stops for 10 days selling stuff. That's a long road trip to get a horse. So in the next chapter, we are looking at the relationship between Brianna and Roger. And chapter 20 is called Shooting Lessons. I know, can you believe I just talked for like 23 minutes about one small thing? I've missed you guys. The sanguine part of me has been, needing to get back out. Oh, yes. Things have been a challenge. So, Brianna and Roger go into the wilderness for shooting lessons. Roger's shooting lessons. See, Roger knows a lot about history, but again, he's had no practical skills. There was no reason for somebody brought up in Inverness in the time he was brought up with the reverend for a father, and then he becomes a professor of history to know how to shoot. I mean, really know how to shoot and do all this outdoorsy stuff, right? So, Brianna is a very skilled shooter. She's very skilled outdoors woman. She knows her things, right? And she's taken him out. And this is really the first time that she's leaving the baby for the day. Because when you go out, and it's not like now where you can be like, I'm going to the shooting range, and you're going to drive to one, and you spend your 2 hours there shooting targets, and you come back. Yeah, they're going off-road, like by foot. So, and Roger's never shot a gun. He's held one. He knows how they work, and he understands how they function. But it's more than just about going shooting. This is about spending time alone. And when it was suggested, Claire was like, you need some alone time without the baby. The baby's old enough now to have regular food and that kind of thing, even though he's still a nursling. And so they take this time in this beautiful, warm, late autumn day, and they go into the wilderness, and they need to get far enough away from the houses, the big house, to where they can't hear the baby. Because Brianna is feeling terrible maternal guilt. I don't want to leave the baby, but I really want to leave the baby. I need some alone time. I don't want to leave the baby. A lot of us feel that way. I will tell you, I don't know one working mom who works outside of the home or works inside of the home but has to have someone come in and sit the baby so she can work, that wants to leave their baby to do it. I love work. I always have. I started babysitting when I was 10 years old, and basically I've worked ever since. And I'm 52. I've worked for a really long time. I love work. And I was thankful and grateful to be able to spend several years as a stay-at-home mom. But when I was a stay-at-home mom, I ran things like groups and clubs in person. I worked for a prior boss and did a bunch of work for her on the side from home. So I still worked, but it just looked a lot different. And until my youngest was 2, I was at home. And then I started doing birth-related work. And so I didn't work that much in the beginning because he was little still. Until my oldest was 13, I worked very part-time. And I off-tracked for a lot of years. I knew I liked work so much, I didn't want to sacrifice my littles for it. And I was grateful, given my husband's job, that though we were not rich by any means, we had enough, and it was possible. And then whatever I could supplement, I did. She doesn't want to leave him, but she knows that she needs that separation. He's a baby that's pretty high need and requires a lot. And she's got to get away, and she feels that tug and that pull, and she can't even hear anything that remotely sounds like a baby. She's got to get out of there. And then she can connect with Roger, and they can actually talk and just spend time together. It's super important to have that. And I encourage my families that I work with that they need to spend, especially first-time parents, and those who have lots of children, I say, now remember, during this time where you guys aren't being physically intimate, you're not having sex because you just had a baby, this is a good time to sort of date each other because it's very stressful. It's a lovely stress. Babies are amazing and I love them. They're awesome. However, they're very challenging and they take up 23 hours and 55 minutes of a day. The other 5 minutes they would take up too if you didn't have to go to the bathroom. And half the time they're in the bathroom with you. Anyway, so they require so much physical and emotional care, right? And that couples need to be able to spend, I tell them to set a timer, I kid you not, for like 3 minutes each in the beginning. And they each talk for 3 minutes about anything that's not baby related, parenting related, because we shouldn't lose ourselves in it. We're still there. And all the little tiny things that we come across during a day, the things we hear, the things we read, what makes us laugh, what makes us sad, those little epiphanies that we have along the way, those tiny details, if they get lost, it doesn't take very much time for you to have no idea who your partner is. And they have no idea who you are. Because those little tiny things are what turn us into who we become in a month, in 6 months, in a year. And guess what? For a lot of people, they don't even feel like they can breathe hardly for the first 3 months after a baby's born. I'm not saying leave your kid at home and go on a date when they're tiny. Babies are portable. But you need to have little bits of dedicated time to check in with each other, to hear each other, to see each other. And then it's a lot easier to handle the stress and to be really gracious and merciful with each other because it's hard. It's hard, especially in our society, because we don't have a lot of extended family. We don't have our tribe. Most of us don't have that. We do it all by ourselves. And I don't think we're meant to do it all by ourselves. Like in this chapter, Lizzie has the baby. Jamie and Claire are around. There's other people available. But they have community so she can step out into the wilderness for an afternoon. I would have killed for that when my kids were little. I had nobody. So I get it, right? And our culture is so hard now. We just lack so much, and we have so much mental health issues. And I really think if we lived in deep, accountable community, we wouldn't have so much. It's a pain to have people know your business, but you know what? I think it's healthier for us to have people know our business and keep us accountable and keep us on the straight. And we're doing what we need to be doing, and we're supporting other people, and they're supporting us. I think if we can find that, it's a lot better. And we're a lot healthier all the way around, and so are they. So she's getting this little taste of independence just for an afternoon. And she and Roger's relationship needs to be nurtured. They haven't been back together very long. They just got married, truly married at the gathering. And not only have they had this baby between them, they have the history of what happened to Brianna, but also what happened to Roger, ending up with a Kenyan Kahaka, right? They have both had some deep trauma. And the whole psychological trauma of not knowing about if the other person cared still. She thought he left, that he abandoned her, right? And then he had no idea if he was ever going to get out of there, if she would still want him. And then they had the sacrifice of young Ian. Like, there's a lot that has to be processed and unpacked, and it's been a very short time. They're both still healing. They're both navigating this world. Like, she has had the ability to navigate it a lot better, not only because of her skill set, but because she lived at Jocasta's. She became part of the day-to-day. She became part of the community. So she integrated. Roger was with the tribe most of the time after being on that terrible ship with Bonnet, right? And Bonnet is still looming over them. Is he dead or alive? Well, we know he's alive because they escaped that blast, he and Brianna together. But he could be dead from something else. So they have a lot that they're carrying. So much. Imagine if Jamie and Claire had to deal with Jamie's stuff after he was raped and abused by Randall and all that stuff going on in France. If they would have had a 6-month-old baby when that happened with Blackjack. And they had to deal with having another person to care for, complicating this situation. So they have a really tough road. And it's not like they have like the neighborhood therapist they can go to. They're doing their best, and they're working into that comfort and into that intimacy, and this is part of that. So they walk in this lovely, mossy, earth, and they're just talking, and they're kind of letting it all, taking some deep breaths, and all right, we can just be us now. We can like put that hat away for a while. And I know for most women, I'm not a guy, but for most women, we kind of have to take those layers off so we can just be a woman, right? Like she has to take off, she has to get away from even the sounds getting to her. That someone's taking care of my baby. I don't have to be on mother alert. And she could put that down for right now. We have to have that transition and reintegration into ourself, right? I think men are a little more analog than that. A lot of men, I don't say all men. My husband's not analog about that. He tends to be very emotional. So they have to go through the paces. You can see probably your relationship in this. And with little babies, we are touched the heck out. So she's got to be like, okay, I'm just Brianna, and this is what I'm doing, and this is my husband, and we're going on a date. We're going on a date for shooting lessons. So it starts out like, they already kiss, and it's getting moody, and then she hears sounds from the houses that totally breaks that spell. So they move deeper into where they're going. And they really end up during this conversation because she wants to go barefoot. And actually, I will say there are studies that talk about the importance of actually being barefoot in nature. I know for a lot of us in this 21st century, we're like, oh my God, but then I could cut my foot. Something could bite me. I mean, we do think that, right? And that's exactly what Roger was thinking. Should we be barefoot out here? So he's thinking along the lines of us. But we really need to connect to the earth. We are holistic beings. The earth has evolved with us. We are part of each other, and we do need to connect, and we need to be one in nature. Nature is medicine, not ingesting it, just being in it and being in the sunshine or being in the snow, being outside and being unplugged with nature is really, really valuable. I mean, I cannot imagine what New York City would be like if Central Park wasn't there. It would be an absolute nightmare without that giant green space. I know everybody doesn't have access to it, and I think, what do you do if you're in an area where it's only concrete? People plant rooftop gardens. They're like doing anything they can to have any kind of vegetation and like nature near. It's we need it as humans. We can't just live in a concrete jungle. So we start on this path of them talking about vaccinations and Roger being worried about injury, etc. And they start talking about what they had before they left. And it's interesting how it affects the two of them differently. Because Roger even got a dengue fever vaccination, which is really funny because they don't need it there. But they may have, if, like, say, Brianna went to the West Indies to go through the stones before Roger came back, because that's where Claire knew the cave, Abandawe, that Brianna could travel. And so there are diseases that are passed just from the slave ships coming in from Africa. So it's possible, right? So Roger ends up stepping on something, and it kind of, now we see from the external conversation, we see an internal conversation. This is the mother and her. What about Jimmy? Can I keep him safe? He walks around barefoot everywhere. What if he gets hurt? What if it festers? Because everything can kill you. People could die from a wound that we would consider very simple or not a problem. We have running water and soap. We can clean wounds. We have antibiotics if we need them, but we have other things and the ability to keep wounds clean in a way that they didn't then. It was really easy to get an infection and die. And so she's having all these inner things going on. Even thinking about Jamie injuring himself and Claire tending to it. She's like, well, he'll be okay because my mom is there. But she worries. And then she turns her thoughts to what happens if Roger gets injured and dies. And she wants him to be careful. So she's having all of these thoughts going on inside of her. And then we kind of pause on that, right? We pause there. And she starts showing him, giving him a lesson about how to hold the gun, what to do, etc. And Roger's kind of enjoying watching her because she's masterful and she's very commanding. I mean, like, book Brianna is 6'1", and she's not real graceful. She's kind of big and lumbering, and she's a striking Viking, right? And he's looking at her with her hair pulled back and the clothes she's wearing, and it's very interesting. I love where he says that it's striking to him how much she resembles her father, Jamie, at this moment, but he never had an arse like that. He was congratulating himself on his choice of instructor. The other part was he didn't want to be embarrassed in front of Jamie. His skill set's already really lacking in the 18th century, so better that Brianna teaches him. And now we get to see Roger's internal voice. And now it's switched to him as she's going through instruction, and the ulterior motive comes out of this is being a date. This is date night. Fraser's Ridge style. And he thinks, he's thinking about her and she's very inviting and thinking about the time spent, and he's like, they have time, I need a shooting lesson. Now he's all getting aroused thinking about her, right? But Roger, unfortunately, is a very bad shot. He has to use round after round after round, and they make their own shells at this point. And Brianna ends up shooting or killing a squirrel. She explains how to kill a squirrel without it being full of buckshot, okay? And she thought that maybe Jamie taught her, but then young Ian comes up in the conversation. And this is something they hadn't talked about since he got back yet. man. So this is where things get a little deeper, okay? They're moving into territory that's necessary, definitely not sexy time, but it's something that they have to talk about. And Roger makes a startling revelation to Brianna that he killed a man in the Kenyankahaka village that night, and that he doesn't think about it very often. And it was really in defense. He needed to get away. He was trying to escape. But young Ian sacrificed to staying at the village so Roger could go back to Brianna is just weighing on Roger really heavily. And she wants to know what's wrong. And he just says he's sorry about her cousin. And instead of her, sometimes she can be like, rah, right? She puts her hand on him and pulls close. And she just says she's sorry too, but it isn't any more your fault than mine or Da's or Ian's for that matter. She gave a small snort that might have been intended for a laugh. If it's anyone's fault, it's Lizzie's, and nobody blames her. That's what I've been saying the whole frickin' time. Lizzie got a total free pass. That girl. And Brianna says he had never told her before about what happened that night in the village. And now he explains it. That what happened, and he wasn't even sure if he killed him. But the belief was that he was dead, and that's why they had to trade somebody for the replacement of that man, which I know we've talked about before, that was common practice, that they would adopt people into their tribe in order to keep their numbers where they needed to be for survival, right? They really had to have that, and they washed them of their, whatever their color or tribe was, they were now Kenyankahaka. Though Roger knows it was what he had to do, he still feels like he robbed that Kenyankahakan man from his tribe, from his family, from his life, and Roger has his own now. So he tries to unsuccessfully shoot more and more and more, right? He just sucks at it and can't figure out why at this point. So they sit down to have their meal that they brought, and all of a sudden he says, pizza. So this is the game of 20th century foods I miss. And then Coca-Cola and pizza with beer and real beer, not Lizzie's beer, etc. And Brianna starts thinking in her engineering mind, hey, I think we could make pizza here. We could use goat cheese. We have sun-dried tomatoes. I don't know about the oregano, but we don't need it anyway. I can make crust, whatever. Like, I can make pizza dough. So Roger said how pizza came to the colonies. They could do it. They could make pizza. That would be really interesting to introduce foods that we're used to eating. I mean, of course, they'd be more rustic and in a different way. But I totally would be like, I am going to make tacos. I can make corn tortillas. Corn is here, I can figure out. We have it. And I am going to make taco. We're going to have Taco Tuesday in the 18th century. I would bring that. 100%. So they've finished their meal, they've had a little laugh, they've played a couple of games, and then Brianna's breasts are in trouble. And in pure Diana Gabaldon form, Roger helps a girl out, right? He helps Brianna out with her overly full breasts, and, they have some sexy time, including breast milk. And if you've listened to the podcast at all, I'll just say that, hey, guys don't know if they're milk guys until their wife has a baby and is breastfeeding. Or I might say anybody or lesbian couple, the non-lactating partner may not know she likes it or not until she gets there. So I like that Diana Gabaldon normalizes lactating breasts into sexual play and into intimacy because it's a reality. And, my first time mamas, I always tell them, like, this is really normal. If neither of you like it, then here's what just wear a nursing bra and pads and bed, whatever. Then your breasts are off limits for a while. But if you do like it, it's fine. And yes, if there's no baby available, a partner is a heck of a lot better at clearing breasts or getting rid of clogged milk ducts than like hand expressing or a pump. So there you go. There's your little breastfeeding lesson. So there's not a lot of description. She just describes her taking her shirt off and that she needs him. And then afterward, they're just like happily lounging on the ground. And there's something interesting that happens after that as she's trying to project herself into his mind. Are you there? Do they have that it connection? And does she get this from Claire and Jamie? Because her mother, they never truly broke that connection 200 years apart. They would dream of each other. I mean, in such reality, right? It's like they would almost travel, project into each other's dreams, that they kept that thread alive. And Brianna's reaching out to Roger, and yes, he reached back. So they have that connection. And it's very comforting. Have you ever done that? Where you're laying in bed or you're apart from each other and you just concentrate as hard as you can. And then your phone rings or your partner reaches for you in bed or something. And there's a response to what you psychically put out there, right? I love that. Or the next day, you call the person if they're not around and you say, hey, I was thinking about you at this time. You came into my head at this time last night. And they're like, yeah, I was thinking about you right then. Or with friends. I have something really interesting happen to me as a midwife. And it's funny, you're probably going to think it's bananas. But when I have created a really deep bond with some of my clients, I will know when they get pregnant again. I know they're pregnant because they'll start popping up in my mind very distinctly. And I'm like, oh. And then usually within 2 weeks to 3 weeks, I get a text message or a phone call saying, hi, peed on a stick this morning. And I just laugh. And half of them know that this happens to me. And they're like, you weren't surprised, were you? Mm-mm. I'm like, I totally knew. It's like, I don't know what it is, but I swear that just like brand new life talks to me. Hey, Des, I'm here. I'm like, hey, meet you in 9 months. It's fascinating. But there's this, I have some kind of bizarre spiritual connection. And when I lay my hands on a baby and talk to the baby while I'm feeling for a position and stuff, the baby responds. And when the baby's born and I put my hands on the baby and talk to the baby knows me. Oh, that's you. I know you. And it's this interesting connection. I swear those babies talk to me through putting my hands on the mama's belly. Yeah, it's fascinating. But I feel very rooted and connected to nature and to people. And that's just how I function. To me, it's just part of my spiritual nature. And so for Brianna to do this, I was like, yeah, it's normal. I don't know if you've ever done it, but try it, I guess. We all have different levels of beliefs and thoughts on all of this, but mine are pretty like, yeah, the spiritual realm is absolute in my mind. 100%. So as we move into the last part of this, and they're heading back, there's just talking, and they're walking, and they've had a good day. It's been a good date day. It's wonderful. And they happen onto this flock of wild turkeys as they're going back. And Roger can't hit anything. These turkeys are freaking out. Brianna ends up getting a turkey. And it was amazing. She had this beautiful shot. She gets the turkey, and they're going to have a nice meal. And Roger says, "Holy God, that wasn't just luck, was it?" She says, "Maybe half." And he doesn't think he's ever seen a turkey that wasn't roasted with chestnut dressing and potatoes. And this drew immense respect from Roger. Like, he was so impressed because now he gets to see her skill in real action, real time. And he's amazed. "That's great shooting, Bree." And then he's like, "Wait, but you haven't been shooting very long. What, 6 months?" And she's like, "No, more like 6 years. Or really, 10. So now we get that background. This is where Daddy Frank, and this is where I'm like, I get into these parts of the books and we get those small little nuggets on Frank. I just love him more and more and more. And every time I go back and see him, I'm like, even if he didn't tell Claire Jamie was alive, even if he didn't do certain things and there was jealousy, and like Jamie's jealous of Frank, like he wants to go ahead in time and like beat him up. Like, Jamie's made peace with Frank. Claire's made peace with Frank, and whatever that relationship was, whatever it needed to be. And even though he held things back and he was just woefully imperfect, just like Claire, just like Jamie, just like all of them, he's a human and he was hurt. But he has a daughter and he's going to train her. And he was military, but he was a city guy. City man. He took her out into the mountains and taught her survival skills and taught her how to shoot. 10 years? She was a teenager. And he purposely prepared her. At 13 years old, he gave her a .22 gun. She was shooting clay pigeons by the time she was 15. And they went to go hunt doves and quail in the fall. I mean, Frank was not a sportsman. But then they both go like this. Well, that's weird. Like, that's odd. So Frank prepared her unwittingly. And I know Claire was working a lot at the hospital, but she didn't notice Frank teaching Brianna survival skills. Like, Captain Obvious. Why would Frank do that? They lived in the city of Boston. He was a professor. Well, I still think he was doing military stuff, but that's neither here nor there right now. You think Claire would have been like, Frank, why are you teaching her this? Like, she just blindly ignored it. I think she just didn't want to think at all about Jamie as much as possible. She didn't want to bring it up. She was trying to adhere to her bargain, so she shut it all out. And she became oblivious and stupid in this part. I mean, it's just not something people would normally do. And then they kind of wonder if maybe he had found Brianna in the past. But remember, to find people in the past, they have to do something really remarkable. Jamie was remarkable in the Rising. The prison, they found him on the rolls. There has to be something big in order for you to show up in history. They just don't have run-of-the-mill people. I mean, you could be scanning primary sources from a time period and find somebody interesting that you want to follow up and maybe try to see if there's anything more about them. But generally, you're not going to find a lot of just people that are named. And so they think, well, maybe he didn't know anything at all, but he just wanted to make sure. Just so she would be safe. Nah, he knew. Maybe he didn't know how it was going to apply to her, but he wanted her to be prepared in case she could travel and do the same stuff as her mother, right? He loved her. And at that, they just said it's time to go back. And they held each other as they were walking. And this chapter closes so beautifully. Do you think Ian's happy? And Roger just says, I hope so. If he has a wife like mine, then I'm sure he is. So it's great. So the Brianna and Roger chapter had a lot more information in it. And there's so much more depth to it. What Jamie and Herman were doing was necessary, and it kind of gave us that structure and showed us where that storyline was going and the value of friendship and trust and duty and honor, you know. And this is their Roger and Brianna's relationship growing, integrating, and they're now revealing things that need time to be revealed. That's not a conversation you can have in 5 minutes, you know, in between baby nursing and needing a diaper change or whatever, or all the duties and work that they have on the ridge. I'm so glad to be back. So glad. This is great. I've missed you. I've missed these characters. I've missed the ridge. And there's going to be a lot more to come. And so I thank you for your patience and for listening. And please, I would love your feedback. contact@adramavoutlander.com. 719-425-9444 is the voicemail line. Call it, use it. Comments, questions, thoughts. On Facebook, the A Dram of Outlander page and group is active. The group is very active, so come on over there and join. And then I will put a post in there, and you can always comment there. Or on Twitter, Dram of Outlander. So I do want to hear from you. And in about the next 10 chapters, I want any feedback or thoughts. I really, like I said in the little note I put up the other day, I really want to know what you think about season 4 now that there's been time away. If you've watched the DVDs and watched any extended scenes or scenes that were edited out, what do you think about those? I would really like your valuable input on that. And here's to jumping back in and getting into this book and having a great time along the way. And until next time, Slán Java.